Hey, welcome. How are you?
Very well.
It's good seeing you.
Oh, thank you for this tour. Can you introduce yourself?
I'm Clare, and this is MorYork. It's a building we bought in 1986. It's a 1933 Safeway supermarket, and it's been transformed into sort of the contents of my brain in various manifestations. So we'll walk around and we'll look at what I do with what I find at flea markets, swap meets, garage sales, thrift stores, secondary markets, certainly not art supply stores. But so as a craftsperson, I tend to react to the materials I find. So you see hanging a bunch of buttons and titanium beads from the aircraft industry, and badminton birdies, and Scrabble tiles, and anything I can find in multiple small new units that I can double up and triple up and create these sculptures. Things that take a long time to collect, like numerous lenses and magnifying glasses and a lenticular portrait. I did a series of 13 of these cabinets for a show I did at the Craft and Folk Art Museum in 2014. And this is sort of a riff on the Plato's paradigm about people in a cave dancing in front of a fire and casting shadows and behind a wall. And so it's what layer of reality this actually is. It is a portrait of me, but it's not the real me. It's a lenticular portrait, and when you open the door, the light gets fractured, and so there's images cast on the background, and so it's a complicated thing, but it motivated the specific piece. So, and this is all just covered in copper cladding with big nails that were used to prevent being able to chop open a wood door with your machete. We were very fortunate that nobody had ever played with the building before we bought it. There used to be a suspended ceiling underneath, and the ceiling was all preserved above that ceiling, so it was never touched or painted or played with at all. Skylight holes were there, but we did a peak on them rather than the flat glass they used to be. And it slowly filled up with the accumulation of, well, now it's 40 years of stuff. The first 5 or 6 years we did this, we used to do raves, those sort of wild parties that were just in an unknown location you were going to, and we had agents out parked in the car handing out the tickets, and so it got rather a lot of hard use in the first 4 or 5 years, and then we decided to make it a little more coherent and start filling it with stuff that I work on. When I was about 8 years old, my grandparents gave me a roll-top desk, and it gave me a refuge from my brothers and sisters, and I was able to have my own little world inside this roll-top desk that I could then at night roll the cover down, and it would be protected, and all of my things would be contained there. So, typical childhood stuff, bones and leaves and rocks and things that you find in the natural world, as well as recurring things like, right now I'm obsessed with buttons, because at the Rose Bowl Flea Market one morning I found a 24-foot truck, 8-foot by 8-foot cube, floor to ceiling, little cardboard boxes of buttons, and I bought the whole truck. I asked how much a box of the buttons was, and they said $1, and I said, how much for the whole truck? And they said $500, and that was the fastest I've ever pulled money out of my pocket. And the best part was they delivered for that same money, because they were done. They had finished their job at the flea market that morning. But that roll-top desk is simply an early childhood version of what this building has become. That is just chock-a-block with things I am either interested in, that I collect, that I am attached to, that I make. And it's sort of a giant repository of that early childhood roll-top desk. Continuing the theme, I like putting things, taking raw material and putting it in an order that is then coherent and does a certain thing to communicate, sometimes wordlessly. This is titanium beads from the aircraft industry. They're called swage beads, and there are two pieces of optics. There's a concave and a convex lens, and it's just a way of distorting what you're seeing. And so, simple point of this one cabinet and I call this my princess furniture line, with these weird, sparkly beads. And so obviously I like playing with materials that are repeat, that you can use over and over again. Like this is all pop tops. This is about 80,000 pop tops off of soft drink and beer cans. And each one of these is mechanically attached with wire onto a rebar structure that's covered with hardware cloth. And then it's like embroidery. You just go back and forth and add, every loop you add 10 more pop tops to it. Glass beads, chain mail, more buttons in various forms. And this is dominoes, wooden dominoes from flea markets, endless sets of them. And this is a paean to every garage sale I go to, and there's a garage and a guy with toolboxes and stuff, and there's always paintbrushes that have been abused or used in one way or another. And so I'm fascinated by the history of each one of these. If you could mine the DNA, and I'll use that phrase over and over again, each one of these has its own life, its own story, but together they form something that's, gestalt. It's more than the simple sum of all of those brushes. Natural forms like this rhizome under here. That's a bamboo root, basically. That's covered in the earth underneath that you don't really see usually. Each one of these is a piece of bamboo that would be growing vertically through the ground. This is a cabinet that gets a lot of comment, and usually it's, what in the world is this? And when I tell them what it is, a lot of people go, ugh! But these are human molars, and they're actually from the pyres along the Ganges, where Hindu ritual has the end of one's life cremated in these big fires, and the fires aren't strong enough to really do anything to the teeth, but they do take care of the bones and the flesh and everything else. So there's over 1,200 molar teeth from here, and in order to get the teeth, in the US, buying, selling, or trading human remains is illegal, so you can't do it. So I had to scroll around and find out a way to get this number of teeth, and so I became a dental school. So I had this fake sort of 8.5 by 11 letterhead that had, the Graham dentistry, and I used that to send to B for Bones, and they sent me the 1,200 teeth glued with wax into particle board. And then they would take Ricky Tikki Daisy stickers and stick them on the top of the teeth. And that's how they get it into the US through customs, is that they look at it and they think it's art. So you get this 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that says, when you receive your art, boil it. And you think, what in heaven's name? But what you do is you take a hammer, you break the particle board up, and then you put it in boiling water, and the teeth all sink the wax and the wood float, you skim it, and suddenly you've got clean teeth. And it is legitimate what they do. They sell them so that dental students can drill and fill and do exercises so they know what it's like when they actually approach a dentist. This cabinet is all about sort of the lining here is skin magazines with all the naughty bits cut away, so it's just colors of fleshy tones. It's got curious, sort of traditional cabinet of curiosity items. This is a whale's eardrum, and it's a very, very dense piece of bone, and it's held in a sack of sort of like gristle in the skull of a whale. And when those big sound waves move through the water, this, feels that vibration, and that's how a whale hears. This is a coq de mer, which in the 1500s, all those returning treasure ships from the exotic East, sailors would find those floating off the Seychelles Islands, the only place in the world they really come from. And because of the mons veneris kind of female voluptuous form, the sailors thought they were mermaid seeds. So there's all these stories attached to all of these things. This is fascinating. These are fractal increase, but this is solid chrome from a plating tank. And if you know what plating is, it releases particles of a base material with electricity into a solution. It travels through the solution, attaches to like a bumper or teeth or whatever it is. And so this is the leftovers that then attach onto an anode and a cathode. And it just creates these beautiful forms. So I collect those.
Do you seek those out, or just happenstance of what you
see? Those are sort of in the class of things that you can't really count on finding. It's random. But over the years, over 40 years, I probably collected a dozen good examples of what that material is. And this is a thing. This is called a bezoar. And this is in ruminants, in their stomach, they collect, biologically it collects, and this is compressed fur and hair and inedible things. And then they either cough it up or when they butcher them. But this is a buffalo's remnants of that. So one of those esoteric things that in the Renaissance, bezoar stones were thought to be able to pull poison out of things. So you would find cups made out of bezoar stones that are, the Medici would have to have some so that they know their servants were poisoning them.
Could you tell me about the outside of the cabinet, like the behind the teeth? How was that made?
Oh, the 13 cabinets I did are all exactly the same size. And this is just carving these sort of raw channels, like, a standing person, each one of these. So it's a mark that kind of, I just repeated over and over again, carved into the wood. This gets a lot of inquiries about what it really is. And there are 3 of these in the world. It is a Bausch and Lomb lens, concave surface, 60-inch diameter, and I found 3 of them in a U.S. Army surplus store in Redlands. And at the focal point, which is about here, you can generate 1876 degrees of heat, so you could actually do a death ray. So if you're out in the sun, and that's what all of this gizmo that we designed to do on this, all the moving parts, it allows you to move the piece to stay focused on the sun and keep that focal point where you want it moving. So if you ever played with a magnifying glass out in the sun and zapped a line of ants or one of those things, that's what this can do, but on a very large scale. You don't want to leave this where the sun's going to get it randomly and burn your house down, but a lot of these other things. This is telephone wire, which is one of those vanishing technological supplies. Started at the very top, just in this half-hitch knot, and endlessly did it until I got to the bottom. So, and it's hollow. There's a spike basically on the stand, but it's just an empty, but very, very stiff.
When you're working on a project, do you focus? Because I would think that would take hours and hours and hours and days and months.
Oh,
And
it takes months.
Do you do multiple projects at a time, or do you find yourself?
Yeah, what I find is that as a craftsman, my hands wear out doing certain functions, and this is literally about 350,000 separate knots. So you can imagine the wear and tear that does on certain things. So you have to leave it and go to something that's a little destructive on your hands in a different way. So you find something else to do until it gets a chance to heal.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
yeah.
you'd mentioned earlier about thinking of yourself as a craftsman as opposed to an artist, and I was just intrigued.
Yeah,
by
I
how
have.
you see those two.
I have a BA, a BFA, an MA, and an MFA in crafts from Long Beach State University. And that was when Sam Malouf and people were really focused on the skill of making something. I think what has happened is that art tends to go the route of like Jeff Koons. If you're hiring somebody else to do the practical application of all of your materials, are you really the artist, or are you simply the art director, the designer, the producer? So I consider myself a craftsman. I do every single part of this myself. I don't have assistants or interns or anything doing it for me. So I think there is a difference between being an artist and being a craftsman. And my career is as a craftsman, not as an artist. I have no preconception about what I'm going to do with something. I find a material that is intriguing for one reason or another, and I play with it until I find out what that material does well and doesn't do at all. And it's limited. These things, if they have holes in the center of them, you can string them. I tend not to use any thing other than a mechanical attachment. So it's wired, it's not glued.
Mm-hmm. When you work with materials like the pull tabs or buttons, is it relevant at all to you in creating what you're creating? Its historic use, or do you really just focus on the physical object and what can be done, manipulated, transformed with the physical object?
Because the things I usually pick, the units of repeat, are at the bottom of the value scale. I mean, it's stuff that not too many people find real worth in. So I don't have that. I wouldn't be doing this with gold rings or with valuable material. So I like the open-ended feel of material and it doesn't really transform. It really just accumulates in a way that other people start to see it as something other than its first unit. Paint by numbers, I've used a lot of those in cabinets and other things too. And that's something, when I was a kid, my parents would sit me down at the dining table after eating and have me paint these pre-printed canvases with a color for each one of the sections. So paint by numbers. So I made a cabinet that has this sort of Hopi Kachina pantheon of not gods, they're sort of representative, like the a way to transfer mores and write concepts for living as a upstanding member of the society. So, these. I'm out of here. So we keep talking.
So has much of the organization, is it somewhat stable, or do you wake up one morning and say you want to move things around, or just as you create something new that makes you feel a need to transform
the domino theory happens frequently, where when I build a new piece, it takes a place, and then everything else has to, move to allow it to have its home. A lot of people come in here and they look at stuff that's been here for 10 or 15 years, and they'll say, I haven't seen that before. Well, you just haven't noticed it before. It's been here for quite a while. So.
And when you do a piece, is it typical that the piece is then done, or do you find yourself 10 years later looking at a piece and saying, oh, I have a new idea of how that could be? Or is it much more that you're just more interested in, here's a new material and a new idea I have, and the pieces that are finished are?
Yeah, part of my OCD allows that once I make something out of a raw material, I no longer have to take care of storing it and protecting it and using it. And so the object, to me, once it's finished, it's on its own life journey then, not mine. So I have gone back recently. I made a whole series of spindles, like you see the ones standing in the corner here. And each one of those nuggets is a thrift store teddy bear. And so it's wrapped in shrink wrap and then tied together with string and in these towers. I did so many of them that I had excess, and nobody cares about having one of them. So I started putting clothes on them, and that gave them new life. So we'll look at some over here in the corner over here. And this is me putting sort of fashion clothes on the teddy bear towers. So this network of wire and yarn covering it, sort of an exo blood system on it. And then this one that had the plethora of wigs from the Bob Baker Marionette Theater next door when they were downsizing their storage. And in the background of those are the poor orphans. They're called cats, punks, or knockdowns, and they're used in carnivals to throw baseballs at to win Kewpie dolls and teddy bears and things.
And more teddy bears over here.
Yeah, those are non-load bearing columns. And so, if you look closely, you can see sometimes the pads of the feet and the noses and their little eyes.
So you've got Ionic, Corinthian, and what's the Latin word for bear? Orsi?
Oh, Ursa?
Orsi? Is it? I don't know.
Ursa, isn't it?
Ursa, right? Ursa Major, Ursa Minor.
And then up here you see these unused eyeballs from Steiff teddy bears. And at the Long Beach flea market one morning, I got about 5 boxes filled with a plethora of, never used teddy bear eyeballs. So just had to have them, and then sort of sorted out what I could do with them. And they make these nice sort of glassy stalactites hanging from the ceiling.
Now very well known among.
Well, yeah, and that's
Southern California.
Everybody thinks they have the ideal material for me to use, and that rarely is the truth. But so actually, this is another example of buying material in the restroom. The Italian glass mosaic tile from the 50s, one morning at the Rose Bowl flea market, we found 13 boxes of 1 foot square sheets of this tile. So we designed the room to eat all of that tile up, and it's another sort of quantity of things that I think adds to a gestaltish environment.
And do you find that you, like, when you're working with one material, that you do a number of projects sort of exploring the limits or the possibilities of that one material, or do you really like to make total break from buttons to move to fabrics?
Most of the materials I'm not as fortunate as I was with the truckload of buttons.
Yeah.
That gave me the chance to go to it and then do a large body of work
Just exploring. all
and
the
still
possibilities.
have tons of stock left. Things like pop tops. I get those in like trash cans from Ronald McDonald House and various places that have their support base collect them for them, and then I pay more than they get from a metal recycler. So, it's a win-win there, but much less of them. So I typically work through everything and then move off to another material. Maybe back to buttons, but maybe to another material.
Do you want to talk about your offering your space to other artists?
Part of what the mission statement of MorYork has been since retired from a Disney career was to be of service to the local community and act as a sort of detoxification for the accusations of gentrification. We've been here for 40 years, so nobody can really accuse us of moving in and taking advantage of the situation and all that. So we give the space to local artists, craftsmen, musicians, poets, book writers, anybody who has a public module of what they do so that they can integrate themselves into the neighborhood, become known, knock on wood. In the background here you see a lot of my sort of roll top desk I referred to earlier, where each one of these objects I can pick it up and basically tell you the who, what, when, where, and why of how I acquired it, how much I paid, where I was, sometimes what I was wearing, etc., about these specific objects. So this becomes a mnemonic device that allows me to rekindle that epiphany of wonder when I first saw it and prompted me to want it to go in these cases or in these collections. And I can go back and get that spark of making rekindled. So, there's a lot of uncapitalized on ideas here. And I don't think anybody ever lives long enough to take all the creativity they have and bring it to fruition, but one hopes.
There's some pasta rollers down there, right?
Various rolling pins. Some for raviolis,
Yeah.
some for kneaded bread, and all of those things. It's just an interesting comparative form.
Do you see your link with taxidermy to, it feels like it fits right in, but I don't have a theory myself of how it would fit right in to what your art is.
Yeah, I like, I don't have pets, but I have lots of taxidermy, and I think that's kind of a dead pet.
What's the material in the silver?
That's
like it's woven.
a cooling section out of a refrigerator. So,
Really?
yeah, it would.
Fascinating to me how all these different interests come together.
And we're off?
And
No,
next to the the porcelain or whatever, those just
The low-on cord?
placing them together, which one is something that's so deliberately and consciously creating art, but at the same time you're recognizing art in something that most people would, they think it's refuse from an old air conditioner or something, or refrigerator, and having them together. So.
Every object has its own life behind it, and I'm really fascinated by roadkill. And roadkill is stuff that falls off trucks, and this is just a coil of wire that came off of some guy's repair truck, but it created this beautiful sort of explosion of line and sort of.
And just flattened by other cars
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
after it.
They
and
just
you
constantly
recognize it.
rolled over it.
So are you a pain to drive anywhere with? Because you're always saying, pull over, stop.
Oh yeah, I brake for all sorts of random beauty.
I brake for art. Oh, beauty. I brake for beauty. I love that. Did you have a sense from the beginning that when you saw this space that this is what you wanted to create of it, or was it just an
I
evolution
think
as you...
I refer back to the sort of paradigm of the roll-top desk. This just gave me an opportunity of encasing a wide range of interests and objects and manipulations into one place. So, and it was all about storytelling too. I tend to be probably shy. I don't volunteer information as readily as I answer questions. So, part of that is social anxiety. This allows me to mask my feelings into tangible, explanatory notes of things we all live through. This is interesting. This is rosaries, and there's 3,200 in this massed accumulation. And what I'm fascinated by is if you could reconstruct the times the rosary was said over each of these, and times 3,200, and the residual prayer power in this, just imagine that legacy. If we've already mapped the human genome, maybe there's a way of doing that for material objects, But when I turn the lights off at night here, anything that's phosphorescent plastic in here glows. So I get this green column of glowing things. And it doesn't last all night. It lasts for about 2 hours, and then it starts dissipating. But from the skylights, it absorbs the energy during the day. And I found the LED lights that we're using also charge it. Oh. So at night, it's this glowing green column.
This is the first one I've noticed where the sound of it, as you were gathering it, seems like it is actually also part of the artwork.
Yeah.
So I have a question. The space seems immaculate and very full. Where do you actually create new works?
Well, I always joke that we had a big party last night for the opening for this Victoria Areola show. And this is a paean to her mother's wedding dress and then women she knew in her life, etc. So when all those people were here, it was literally shoulder to shoulder. And people tend to touch things here and, wow, things are so clean. Well, they're helping to dust, so. Let me see. This is a fascinating bunch of stuff that, this is a collection. I haven't done anything with most of this yet, but the Japanese lacquer worker process leaves behind artifact, the bowls, the cabinets that they store their stuff in, and the leftovers from the process, which is immaculate craftsmanship. It's doing precious objects and food containers and all of that stuff. But the remnants are all of these just drips and gooey, and once lacquer catalyzes, it's impervious to liquids, to solvents, to all of that. That's why it becomes a food container, because it controls that very well. This is by a guy named Toru Tanaka. And that is him cleaning his brushes or his spatulas like this at the end of every work session onto one consistent place. And so it just built that giant clog of the leftover catalyzing.
It's sort of fascinating that that's sort of a counterpart to what they're creating.
Yeah, and this has become very expensive in the antiques market now. Leftover, yeah, the tools that a lacquer worker would use.
Do you find a difference when you're using man-made materials like buttons or pull tabs as opposed to you do a lot with feathers and?
Yeah, there is a certain thing, but it's really just a responding to the material in a slightly different way, but it's really just quantities. This is feathers that I walk in the neighborhood and I find. We have some ravens and a couple of owls and the parrots when they fly through. And then the background here is Wrigley Spearmint gum wrappers. So it's sort of free Silver Lake shingles.
Abalone shells or something.
Yeah.
Wow. But that many, I mean, is that over here? You live in the city. You live in Los Angeles. How do you?
Yeah,
Are there really
well-
that many birds that?
Yeah. Almost all of
Are you
those.
plucking them
there
up?
was
We have
another big
naked
tower
birds because
up
you're-
at the front that was actually all of the dove feathers that fell on the campus of, there's at CSUOB, there's a quad sort of, and I'd eat lunch there when I was doing my MFA. And I'd collect all of the dove and pigeon feathers that fell in the trees from one day to the next. And so it's 15 weeks of daily practice of picking up all those feathers. And it's just a way of memorializing that sequence of time while I was eating my lunch, out there. So
in your living space, do you also, do you find it that you need to have it very spare as it sort of stop your brain, or does your brain need this? This is where your brain is at ease.
It's where we live, and we can walk over there. It's 5 feet across the alley, which is a blessing to have a studio, this close to where you're actually living. Because I tend to get up at about 3 in the morning, and I'm over here by 4. So, back and forth you go, and to have it accessible. We used to live in Los Feliz, which is about 3.5 miles from here. But, even that amount of time sometimes would be a half hour to get home because the freeway's clogged or something. So it's an ideal thing in retirement to be able to just be that close to what I want to be doing. So
3 steps instead of 3 miles, right?
yeah, exactly. Another material I used a lot was yardsticks. There was the pyramid at the front door, and then there's this yardstickly sofa, which is, each one of these bundles is 8 yardsticks. And the funniest part is people would come up and look at this and say, how big is this? I really like this.
You're
Well,
saying
it's
the yardstick still has its
measured for you. It's made out of yardsticks. It's 36 inches deep. And I tend to like collections of repeat forms, like this ladies who lunch here all together. Just different people's interpretation in wood, in metal, of the female form.
And is this piece back here? Is this the male eye? Or is that also a female?
Yeah.
This
yeah.
one.
Oh, that's Mickey Mouse.
Oh.
This is a whale's sort of shoulder process, where the flapper, the fin is. But the texture on that is so beautiful. It looks like a clump of granite or sand or something. Oh, and here you can see the teddy bear towers. That each one of these is a teddy bear. And at Valley Thrift, any teddy bear, any size, for $1. And if you thought about, instead of teddy bears, getting fiberfill or something from like one of those sewing supplies place, be a fortune. I mean, and these are, a van load for $5.
Yeah.
So. And then jigsaw puzzle pieces too. That's something that come in untold vast quantities,
Oh my.
in various sizes. So, I just stand at the drill press for hours drilling holes in things to be able to string. And that's something that's not a very flexible material. It does.
So these are what,
sort
like
of-
20 feet? How long is this? Does it go all the way up?
Actually, it's 16.8 to the bottom of the truss. So.
And
but-
when you start, you just are intrigued, you buy a huge box of puzzles. Do you
Oh,
like?
no. I got to say that about the collecting impulse is it usually takes years and years and years. Like in the rosaries, that took 15 years to collect enough rosaries to fill that. So
But did you start with just a few and have a vision of what it could become, or
no,
you just
I
manipulate
I
the
thought it was an
material?
interesting material, and you throw it to the wind and you say, okay, if I can collect enough of these, I could make something out of them. So that's what I do. But things like, I know that thrift stores universally have lots of jigsaw puzzle pieces. And they're usually very cheap because they're missing pieces. And
Right, nobody wants.
I can get as many as possible. So, yeah, I did a whole run of those. And I will go back to those at some point because I'm starting to overflow the storage space I have for jigsaw puzzle pieces. So I have to do something with them. Green is the rarest color in buttons.
Really?
Yeah. The greens were, in the whole truckload I bought, they were the least represented in color. And these are the blue version of those Steiff teddy bear eyeballs that were all in that lot I got at the Long Beach Flea Market. And this is the painted paint by numbers and then the unpainted printed canvas parts of it. Another example of vanishing technology, when you used to have a motel or hotel key, that said, if found, please return to. So again, this is another one of those, if you knew who, what, when, where, why about, this. So I think it's just an interesting, a lot of younger people now come in and things like that just catch them unawares. They have no idea what they are.
Yeah, what its original
Yeah.
incarnation was. Well, I think it's fascinating that it's like, I think of those as plastic and very unnatural, and yet you manipulated them in a way that just looks like a branch with leaves. It's just fascinating to me how you take something that in its original context evokes,
Yeah.
a response, and you transform
You know
it
what
where the response is almost
Chirigareff
opposite.
architecture is? It's a very sort of over-embellished way of like columns and facades on churches and buildings and stuff. These are all Jello molds, but it creates that kind of feeling that I got when I was looking at all those sort of churchly applications. And these are just all buffing wheels for various rotating, working with materials. So I'm still building that tower that will go all the way up eventually.
And this wall is just amazing to me.
I did
How many cuts on your fingers would that?
Now that is one of the more destructive versions of that because the edges are very, very sharp, and each one of those has from like 8 to 16 nails holding the edge down. So other people touching it don't have the same problems I did. But so it's a lot of nailing tin can lids onto a surface. I did a a design house in one of the Kips Bay projects in New York and did a complete suite of floor, ceiling, walls, boiserie with tin cans instead of wood panel. Another way of playing with the buttons, so they're just, strings of consistent sizes.
Do you have the same sense when you finish a piece of, your feelings about that piece and then encountering it or passing by 15 years later? Do you retain that initial thought, or does your own sense of a piece evolve over time?
I would say it stabilizes into representing something that I enjoyed very much giving birth to. But I suppose it's like having children, that you're proud of them regardless of what they've become. It's something that I'm connected to. And for that reason, I tend not to go back and restructure or redo or rehabilitate.
Let it be what it...
Yeah, they age in the same way that we do, and people that would have a facelift are always a mystery to me. Why you would want to alter where you were going, in that manner and become something else that's not real. Anyway, morbid. Bottle caps. I've done a lot with bottle caps, millions of them basically. You become, this is another one that's highly destructive to one's hands. It really...
Are you able to, do you use gloves, or do you feel like you need to be...
I find that I can't feel the material, so it's harder to work with gloves and protective equipment.
Yeah, these chains are just, that's gorgeous, but
Yeah.
that has to have been hundreds or thousands of hours, right, to create these?
Yeah, if you took it, but see, these are all broken up into different periods, the earlier, middle, and then late approaches. So it doesn't feel like it's thousands of hours, but you add it all up, and yeah. I've sold a lot of bottle caps. That was very popular for a while. In amongst all of this stuff is things that turned out to be quite valuable, like these architectural bits. This is a Louis Sullivan, part of the Chicago Stock Exchange, but it's just such an interesting, iconic form, and regular people have accessibility to this kind of stuff, and I think that's really fascinating. That practice of taking your kids' shoes and putting it copper plated. This was a very valuable Levi's jacket for a kid. That was, the same thing happened to it. See, there's the tag for Levi's. So
But someone else did
were
that.
it not coppered, this would probably be worth a couple $1,000. But, as a copper
and did
version,
you do the
it's-
copper? Did you,
No,
that
I
you
swap
you
meet.
acquired it.
Swap meet. Yep. And I love paintbrushes as a sort of marker of, other people's labor. These are all used paintbrushes, and, the patina they all get. And if you could send them back to where they came from, and what were you involved in? What made you like this? The artwork that was created.
Or the ones that still look pristine, did they have this sad life of...
Well, they probably have a
reaching
less
there for
interesting life than the ones that are really
There's a
dumped out.
tragedy.
So
Oh my gosh.
this was another great find, this sort of chunk glass mosaic piece. It was sold at a local auction house, and it was covered in dust, and it was on one of those chandelier rocks, so it was very close to the floor. And they had described it as a cast resin light fixture. But turns out it's actually glass, and it was done by a guy named Adolf Meyer in the 30s. And it ended up at Maxfield Plum in Ghirardelli Square in San Francisco. And then, so I got it for $300. And it's worth, many times that.
And what about the surround of this?
Oh, those are
Mirror.
buttons, but just sort of, it looks like corals or and a variety of lenses. Again, a big store detection mirror, and then smaller ones around that. And this is that roll-top desk. This is actually the grandparents supplied roll-top desk that was my foundation as a kid. And on here, these are all stirs from liquor and
Cocktails.
drinks and pop. Yeah.
You're right, that ephemera that you
And there's
recognized from your
26,000
childhood.
on this. Whoa. So there's another one. If you could plumb the DNA of each individual, who you were drinking with, where, when that happened.
I'm waiting to see what you do with those plastic dental floss.
Yes, that will be coming along.
What is the white?
This is also fascinating, and
But it's not pertinent to the
no,
issue.
No.
How do people? One of the big questions is how do people find you, and because this is, it's quite magical and it's somewhat secret. I mean, unless you happen to know of you, Claire. So
Unless you
how-
happen to have been friends with.
how do people find you?
I would say that the most authentic way of approaching this situation is to be non-advertising. I'm not interested in having this facade that represents what I want other people to think about this. They have to experience it. They have to walk in the front door and find a reason to ask me a question. I get a lot of people who visit and are completely mute and don't interact either with the stuff or me, and why would I want to waste time with them?
Well, for those who would like to come in person and see you and ask a question, how would they go about that?
Do you have regular hours? Should they contact you?
No.
What's your preference for?
How do they find you? Where is this?
If someone sees this video and says, this speaks to me deeply, I'd love to see it in person. Do you have a preference on
It doesn't take too much. I mean, you go to the internet and you put in MorYork or you put in my name, Clare Graham, and that should give you enough to, you have to earn it. I mean,
And
in a
MorYork
certain
is
way.
M-O-R.
Cap Y-O-R-K, but one word. Yeah.
What's the etymology of MorYork?
We have godchildren, Henry and Jane, and when they were probably 7 and 8 years old, their parents took them on a trip to New York. So they went to museums and they went, to flea markets, and they just enjoyed the city. They came back here and they saw what we were doing in the building, and that was probably 10 years into the building, so it was starting to fill with stuff. And we asked the kids what we should name the building, and they said, well, it's MorYork. So, using their perspective at the time on what it meant. So that's where the name came from.
And it's on York.
It is on York. But we didn't name the street. That was just a happenstance. So there's more to this.
More York.
There's even